Hello and welcome to another A Tippling Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. I'm going to walk you through the front lines and then discuss various things to do with this whole conflict, both sort of large and tactical, strategic, geopolitical and tactical. Anyway, let's get to the front line as quickly as I can. So we have the Oskil River line, as I like to see it, that front up there after the lightning attack. We'll go there first. So what's been happening? Well, as you can see from this larger map, there has been some territory taken in and around the Lyman area. This has been ongoing for the last few days. What's worth noting here is that after there was a bit of a standstill, there has been this progress at increased tempo from the point of view of the Ukrainians, and they have taken as much land really in the time that they did to take this whole Kharkiv area. So they're pretty much from Izium to Svatove, they're about halfway there. And actually that's comparable to the lightning attack that they did, a week or so ago, or a couple of weeks ago. And so therefore, although you might have thought they've been at a bit of a standstill, certainly in this area, they are making good progress. And it's a case of once the barrier breaks, then there's a flood. And I think it's safe to say that the Russians are not putting up huge amounts of resistance once they are broken, because they just don't have the troops. This is all about getting the land taken before the mobilized troops get there. And there is some indication that some troops have been sent with virtually no training already. That's an absolute disaster, in my opinion. It's just it's indicative of the complete mess Russia are in, and they're having to do this forced mobilization to get troops there as quickly as possible. Really, Putin back in May made a big speech where they expected him to do a mobilization, and he didn't. In hindsight, he should have done it back in May, because they are in heaps of trouble now, and that has forced Putin's hand to make this hasty mobilization, and they're just going to pack the lines with poorly trained, low motivation troops that are only going to do any good in some kind of Pyrrhic victory where they are just cannon fodder. Anyway, there's been further advances north of Kupiansk, Horobivka. Let's have a look and see what we've got here. So, yeah, Horobivka, and actually a town just to the east of the Oskil River. Let's see if I can find the correct map. That would help, wouldn't it? Tavolzhanka, just up north of Kupiansk. So they are making some inroads there. That is contested, but, they're on the way. And Kupiansk, Vuzlovi is liberated. So that's that little town there, just to the east of the Oskil River. And there are several contested villages to the east of Kupiansk. That is looking like it might start going places, as well as north here. And what you'd want to do is join these attacks up. If you have a bridgehead that's so successful that you advance really quickly, what happens is you are then potentially, you can be victim to being flanked and cut off. I said this the other day, you get yourself isolated like you do on maybe, I don't know, a sports pitch, something like a rugby pitch. If you make a run with the ball and you made such a good quick run and eventually get tackled here, you end up stopping here. Well, you're isolated, and actually all your friends are back here and they can just close around you. So this is why the Ukrainians are going to want to join up their salients and their bridgeheads, and this is pretty evident down here in and around the Lyman area. So what happened before? Well, I showed you that this was a case that initially they made this salient here, this bridgehead, and they made really good progress. And then they sort of the next day or next few days they joined this up. And Drobisheve is this village that they seem to be, or small town that they seem to be fighting hard to defend, the Russians, but they are pretty much surrounded. There is talk actually that has now been liberated. and that this is all one contiguous front line. However, there's also the idea that Chandriholove has not fallen. I mean, it's really difficult because operational security means information coming out of here is piecemeal and difficult to verify. So some people are saying that there is this little pocket of Russian resistance still here. And then others are saying, no, that's actually fallen. Now, what I wanted to say is when you make these attacks into, enemy territory, you are weak to a counterattack at the back if you're not careful. The thing with the Ukrainians at the moment is that the Russians are too weak to do counterattacks. So they have the momentum. And so when you're in a defensive line like this, if it's not one contiguous sort of straight line that allows you to give uniform defense, then you are always worried you can be flanked. So imagine you're a Russian here, right? You are worried that actually these guys over here might fall and the Ukrainians can come around behind you. If you are anywhere in here, you are petrified because you're basically surrounded and encircled and your only way out is there. And if that falls, it's game over. Right, so if you're fighting here, you're thinking, oh, am I going to be attacked from behind? Even if you're kind of here, you're worried about a flanking over here and behind you. The point is, there is really good rationale to say as soon as you're in these positions, just get out. You should do a tactical withdrawal so that you have a nice straight front line. Find a natural defensive position that you can defend, because otherwise you are going to lose. Unless you are assured a whole bunch of reinforcements in there, you're on hiding to nothing. So if I was a Russian commander here, I'd say, mate, get out of all of these areas and form a nice straight line. There is, if we go to look at the Google Maps here, we've got Izium, just to give you your landmarks. You've got Izium here, you've got Severodonetsk here, Rubizhne, Kreminna, and Lysychansk. You've got Lyman here, and this is the fighting area I've been talking about. Now let's turn on the terrain map to give you an idea of what the Russians could do. So at the moment, previously they were defending the Oskil River, and then they've been hit around here, and it's all looking pretty messy. Now, if we go in a little bit, there's actually a river that goes north here. It's not a huge river, but it's really marshy, quite a boggy area. Now, the Russians, my opinion would be, if I was in charge of the Russians, I'd say, yeah, we're in trouble here. The problem is they don't want to lose Lyman. If they lose Lyman, then it looks like these towns are in trouble. These cities, towns are in trouble over here. But I would just give that up and take a defensive line behind this boggy river and use that to help you. There's another river here that they could, but then you're a bit closer to this conurbation. So that would be, I'm armchair general. I mean, what do I know what I'm talking about? But it seems really dangerous for the Russians to be, attempting to defend these areas that are really, really high cost defenses, because they are going to lose troops and equipment by the bucket load. If you can do realistically, a tactical withdrawal before you get to this stage, so you can get your equipment out here, what will happen is the Russians will, flee from here without their equipment, because they won't have time to get, towed artillery or, tanks and slow moving vehicles out of here. So they'll just lose a lot. But there's also the theory that has already been lost. And in fact, this area is all in Ukrainian hands, and even Drobisheve at the moment. It just depends who you listen to on, in the open source intelligence community. So that's what's happening there. It looks like the Ukrainians are just going to march on Svatove without too much problem. So there is information that they are getting troops, the Ukrainians this is, getting support reinforcements up here in the northern area to push north. Okay, so it's a case of pushing up from here and pushing upwards probably to Svatove, and whilst also encircling Lyman. So I think this is the river I was telling you about. There are two rivers, one through Svatove down to Kremina, and this sort of boggy, marshy river up here. The Russians could fall behind that. We shall see. Anyway, that's what's going on that front. There is movement. As you can see from the ISW map, this is the one where they were showing equally like this map that there is a pocket of Russian resistance. I think that's probably fallen now. But there you go. Let's now look further down. So we were talking about this area up here. There's a little bridgehead that the Ukrainians made in Spirne. There's a bit of a counterattack from the Russians now. And in fact, oddly, the Russians appear to be counterattacking all the way down this Donetsk and northern or southern Luhansk front line. Now, I said that they would be pulling their troops up to support further north here. It could well be that this is basically Wagner mercenary territory, and this is mainly where the Wagner mercenaries are operating, and they are the better. They've fared a lot better than the regular Russian forces. Now, there have been recruitments ongoing for months, and I showed you some videos of Prigozhin, the guy that's in charge of the PMC, the Wagner mercenary group, recruiting from prisons. And I heard something today that there might well be some of those prisoners already, hitting these front lines, being recruited and trained up and sent into these front lines. So that could be why there's a bit of a renewed incentive to push. But again, I still don't know what the long-term goal is here, because their original idea was to push in from Bakhmut here, and so this is going eastwards and then pushing south from Izium. But they've lost Izium, and I think that the mobilized troops are only going to be at best defensive to hold lines. I can't imagine that the training of those troops and the morale of those troops will allow you to do a proper incisive attack. So I don't know why they're still bothering to attack here. If I was Putin, I'd be thinking, right, I'm going to mobilize and just shore up the defensives so I don't lose this, and then annex these, and then keep it here and take this. I've got, again, if he wants all of Donetsk or Donetsk Oblast, so he may well, this might be his theory, that he's still going for the entirety of the Donetsk Oblast and to take back all of the Luhansk Oblast. But it's just a meat grinder. Anyway, there are counterattacks going on down here from the Russians, or at least not counterattacks, actual attacks, because the Ukrainians have basically held these lines and held them really well. But the Russians are pushing forward. Now, if you come further down here to Volodar, there is a very big risk for the Russians that the Ukrainians are going to push for Mariupol eventually. There is some information that the Ukrainians have amassed some forces here, and this has been a worry for the Russians for some time. Why is this a clever thing to do? I was thinking about this, and if the Ukrainians can push through to Mariupol from here and give a wide enough corridor, because if it's too thin, they can be attacked from either side. It's a bit like what I was saying earlier. If you make a salient, which is, makes an incisive incursion into enemy territory, then you are weak at the back to be cut off and then encircled. So if you do something like this, it needs to be a wide corridor. Why would you want to do that? Well, actually, it would be really good for cutting off this entire region. So there is going to be, so Russia is over here and north here, and most of their reinforcements and supplies is coming from the north, from Belgorod region, coming down here and being sent around the Russian occupied region here. They will also be getting stuff from Crimea. Now, long term, if they lose Kherson, the Russians, then the Ukrainians are going to be in a very good position to start hitting Crimea in a very serious way. If they can take out the Kerch Bridge that connects mainland Russia to Crimea, then they cannot resupply from Crimea. If they take out some of these roads and key points here, then they'll struggle to resupply from Crimea anyway. So if I was a Ukrainian, one of my strategies could be to drive through to Mariupol with a wide corridor that splits the Russians into two sections. And then it means, so Melitopol is already having heaps of partisan activity. There are bombs going off in Melitopol. There are collaborators being killed. You know, this will then give some morale boost to the people in Melitopol. If Mariupol falls, you drive a wedge here and you disconnect these two regions, and then hit the supply route so that Russia cannot resupply this entire region effectively. That seems a really sensible thing for me to do. Hit them from here, and take out key logistics routes. And this whole region is then this is a microcosm, this Kherson region, of what could happen here. You then starve them of supplies, and it's just a kind of a siege mentality, and you eventually squeeze, death by 1,000 cuts. Of course, that will take quite a lot of forces to do that. Anyway, that's what's going on. A broad overview of the front lines. I hope that made sense to you. Again, there are different theories. This is what Defense Politics Asia, he's saying that again, to go back up to the Lyman front, that it's looking like this area that some people think is still holding out has been taken. But, you know, he still hasn't got Drobishevy being liberated, whereas some do. So it depends who you listen to. And Kherson, really no change. It's just a case of waiting out. I did use the term stalemate yesterday. I suppose that's a bit loose. It's not so much a stalemate because I think the Ukrainians are controlling what's going on here. So it kind of looks like a stalemate because nothing's moving. That's what I meant by stalemate. But it isn't like, there's equal attack and defense going on each side, and both of them have got to the point where they can't move anymore. No, I think the Ukrainians are starving the Russians of supplies, and then will sort of move slowly in. So there you go. Okay, let's move on to other things. So Phillips O'Brien, really interesting, talking about what General Zaluzhny has said. Now, he's someone who has been in charge of the Ukrainian forces. Really interesting to finally hear from General Zaluzhny, the commander himself, about how Ukraine originally thwarted the Russian invasion after February 24th. It was clearly a well thought out and effective plan, which took advantage of Russian overconfidence and faulty doctrine. So classics of strategic defensive operation. When confronting stronger opponents, one withdraws. I've talked a lot about these strategic withdrawals, tactical withdrawals actually, in certain places. Preserving your main force. So you withdraw in a sensible way whilst still causing attritional damage to the people you are withdrawing from. You're not running away, you're withdrawing and fighting. And by this, weakening opponent's strength and overextending or exposing to flank strikes so that lines of communication are extended and you're shortening your own lines of communication. So what has happened... Phillips O'Brien is then sort of taking a few key points of what Zaluzhny has said. So, as above, based around letting the Russians advance and get strung out on the roads, then cutting off supplies in the rear and attacking the exposed columns. It was a first sign that the Ukrainians really knew what they were doing and were intellectually far superior. So if I to go back here just to explain there, imagine this was the Russians, right? And these were the Ukrainians. So you allow the Russians to advance and advance and advance, and then you hit their supply routes and their columns as they are coming in to support their main attack, rather than hit them, you know, in a frontal assault, you know, or the frontal defense, if you like, and have the fight around here. You want to fight around here, by attacking their supply lines. And really, that's what the Russians should be doing. But they're just too weak to be able to do that. So this is what Zaluzhny has said. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. So the Ukrainian way of war has a few foundational elements that we have seen in operation around Kyiv and across the country there. One, contesting air supremacy over the area of battle. I talked heaps about that. I did a video mainly about that, which is the Russians never did SEAD, which is suppression of enemy air defense. So they never had control of the skies. They never had air superiority, let alone supremacy. You really want supremacy, which is complete air dominance, and then you can do what you like. They never got that, which means that their air capability could never support the ground troops. There was never what's called a combined arms element to their warfare. There's just different bits of stuff doing different things. You should have a complete, coherent combination of all your elements of warfare. And they just never had that. So they never had the air. Then denying Russia control of cities, complicating the military's communications and logistics. So the only cities they ever took were Mariupol after a huge, that was really, really costly for the Russians. It was costly for the Ukrainians, of course, but really costly for the Russians, and took out loads of their forces for ages. So they're unable to do anything else. Melitopol fell really quickly, and Kherson. But other than that, nothing. These were already annexed cities. Nothing. It took them ages to take some of these towns. And they didn't get Kharkiv, Sumy, Chernihiv up here, Kyiv. They didn't get the cities. So that then hamstrings them in other ways, because it allows the Russian forces to get strung out along the roads in difficult to support columns, and then those columns were attacked from all sides. This is when the Bayraktar drones were doing heaps of damage to the columns. So there you go. That's a bit of the doctrine of the Ukrainian forces. Now, I've talked about shoot and scoot. I just want to show you this video. I'm not going to show any videos with sound today. So this is shoot and scoot. This is a 1 minute 33 video, okay, of a HIMARS. I said I'm not going to show it. Sorry, I'll turn the sound off. Of a HIMARS shooting, right? Here it is. It shot one rocket. It shot another rocket. Okay, we're 11 seconds in. And then it spends about a minute retracting its rocket system downwards. Okay. And then if we forward one a little bit, so here it is. That's where it is there. Sorry, I should probably show you this in larger. So here's the HIMARS. It just shot two rockets. We're now 1 minute in, and it's literally turning around now. And 1 minute 6 seconds, and it's driving off. It's literally on the road. And check this out. As the HIMARS drives off, right, there are other vehicles just driving past. Here's a minibus. She's driving. The HIMARS has just stopped on the side of the road, locked onto its target, shot, and within 1 minute 10 seconds has shot two rockets and left. Right, that means that however good the Russian intelligence is, it can never lock on to that target and then get counter battery attack on that HIMARS system. This is why the HIMARS have not been hit. They are just driving up to places on the road, shooting off a bunch of precision rockets that will hit to the meter their targets, and then they put down their rockets and they drive off and shoot and scoot, and there's nothing that the Russians can do about it. There's just nothing that they can do about it, and that is really powerful. That's capability against Russian capacity. Just to give you a little insight into what war looks like, this is in the Lyman area. I said there was going to be no sound. I've accidentally got sound on all of these. This is the Lyman front, somewhere in that region. And it's just an apocalyptic war zone. You know, what has hit these Russian vehicles, and that's not even a military vehicle that's being used. I mean, that's how desperate they are in a lot of these situations. Just absolutely apocalyptic fronts that shows you, you know, what it's like to do war. Okay, here we go again. All these trees have been decimated. I think this might be even the same footage, just from or the same place, as from a different angle, going the other way. And again, it's pretty devastating stuff. War, isn't it? Obviously. Here's an example of this. This is in the Kharkiv region. This is what the Russians left behind when they did that quick retreat. And I know I've shown you these before, but look at the amount of ammunition here. So this is not only a boon for the Ukrainians, it's a loss for the Russians. So it's like a 6-pointer, like football match. It's not just 3 points to you, but it's 3 points off the other guy because you're playing the other guy. So they don't get 3 points and you get their 3 points. The difference in you and them is 6 points for having a win and them losing, essentially. And that's what this is, which is, a boom for the Ukrainians, a loss for the Russians. And wow, that was happening all over Kharkiv region. Now, I want to talk about the mobilization for a second. So the mobilization is supposedly, they announced it as 300,000 people. It's looking like they're intending to be far more than 300,000, but keeping it officially 300,000. However, there are now stats coming out to say that over 300,000 people from Russia have fled, which means mobilization has been, to some large degree, counterproductive. They have lost a huge amount of people fleeing Russia, which is going to affect their economic capacity, their expertise, the brain drain, the manpower drain, just incredibly damaging for the Russians all over the shop. This is Georgia. Now, remember, some years ago, within the last, I can't remember when it was, the Georgia conflict, Russians were driving tanks in. Like, there's a great image of the same road of all the Russian tanks driving into Georgia when they went to do the same thing to Georgia that they did pretty much, or attempted to do to Ukraine. Right, and on that same road now is all Russian cars trying to escape into Georgia. First of all, they try and invade it. Now they're trying to escape into it for safety. This is a Maxar image, so satellite imagery that Maxar are really helping out the Ukrainians. It's a great, same with Starlink and Elon Musk's satellite capacity. So Russians waiting at the border with Georgia in long lines of trucks and cars after Putin's mobilization order. This is from the September 25th. More than 115,000 Russians have fled into Georgia since mobilization. So just one country has had 115,000 Georgians. Lines formed more than 16 kilometers. So that is Russian people trying to escape mobilization. What does Putin do with that? I said to you yesterday, on the one hand, he wants to be rid of people who aren't for him, because in the long run, he would like dissenters outside of his borders. But on the other hand, he's losing all these people. So it's a kind of 50-50, yeah, no. And that's huge. Okay, so Kryvyi Rih, I'll remind you where Kryvyi Rih is. It's this city. It's Zelensky's home city. That's the airport there was hit last night and destroyed. It's hit and destroyed the airport of Kryvyi Rih. So Russia has done some damage. And again, I think I said this before, I don't know why the Russians didn't do this earlier. And possibly they didn't hit logistics as much as they are doing now because they were expecting to take all of this territory. And if you're going to take that territory, you don't want to destroy the logistics you are going to need. So if you're intending on occupying Kryvyi Rih, you don't want to destroy the airport because that's going to be a hugely important part of the economic stability of this town, this city. So you're not going to want to destroy your logistics like electricity and transport and fuel. You're not going to want to destroy those if you have plans on occupying it. Now they've destroyed the dam there and the airport. That tells me that they have no intentions of occupying Kryvyi Rih, or if they do, they're shooting themselves in the foot because they're then going to have to rebuild all that infrastructure. So what they're doing is they're trying to hamstring the Ukrainians by taking out an airport so they can't get supplies to the Kherson front, take out the dam so they can't get supplies over the Inhulets River on the Kherson front, so on and so forth. That's kind of clever, strategic, or in this case, tactical stuff. But strategically, that's what they should be doing all over Ukraine, which is taking out these important routes of transportation and energy infrastructure. Because otherwise, they're just sending rockets at residential buildings, which appears to be what they've done an awful lot of. They've done that right throughout. You look at what's happened in Mykolaiv and places. It's just all these residential buildings getting hit. Is that because they have such low precision on their weapons? They're just technologically poor weapons compared to the precision weapons of the Ukrainians and then the NATO weapons, or is it because they are trying to break the spirit of the Ukrainians by hitting civilian targets? It could be the latter, but either way, it's just poor. They need to be taking out, really important military logistical infrastructure to do the maximum amount of damage, but they're not. But anyway, they've just destroyed that airfield with X-59 missiles. Further use of the airport is impossible, the Ukrainians say. Now, going back onto, I suppose this is partly to do with the mobilization, partly to do with the truck logistics I was talking to you about yesterday, and saying that actually the Russians have lost so many trucks, but because they're a railway army, they haven't developed a huge supply of trucks. But now that the railways are being hit, and there are ultimately big problems with the Russians getting supplies to their forces, because certain railways are taken out, which means that other railways are having to be used. But so, say for example, you might get to Starobilsk, but then you're going to have to use trucks to get from Starobilsk to here, unless you want to do it by railway and go all the way around there, right? So they are going to have to use way more trucks. They're also going to have to use way more trucks because they can't, their rolling stock is deteriorating. They can't get bearings. I talked that about yesterday. Check out yesterday's video. So the railways themselves are in trouble going forwards. But they're also mobilizing a shed load of troops. So in mobilizing a shed load of troops, they are going to need to have extra trucks for all those extra troops, so extra supplies for all those troops. But they don't have the trucks. And here's an example of how they don't have the trucks. This is a picture, God knows when these trucks were from. But they're pulling out vehicles from what is it, the Second World War almost. Unbelievable. We already know they're using T-60 tanks, and that AK-47 rifle I showed you a mobilized soldier using yesterday was incredibly old. So this is a real problem. Okay, this recording was going to go on too long, so I have split it into two. The next section is about tanks, reactive armor, how shells pierce them, how they blow up, and how turrets are tossed high into the sky. So there's a bit of an extra for you. Please check that out. That will be coming out very shortly, just on the back of this one. But I split them into two because it just would have been too long and people wouldn't have clicked on a video. Anyway, two for the price of one. As time marches inexorably on, yesterday I became 1 year older than I did the day before. 1 year in 1 day. That's how we do things, and I feel all the more wise and knowledgeable for that advancement, although I am now very wary that I am 1 year closer to my inevitable demise. So with all that positivity in mind, at least I am living in the safety of my home, looking at these things on the internet and not having my face in a pool of mud after trying to escape some kind of explosion nearby. So I guess I'm thankful for that. But there you go.